The Jól Feast was the biggest celebration of the year. A whole week of food and ale and mead and fights and laughter and drunken men vomiting in the snow. And there were horse races, wrestling matches, competitions in throwing spears, axes and rocks, and my favourite, the tug of war, where two teams of men or boys tried to pull the other into a cold stream. I got drunk that Yule for the first time, helplessly drunk so that my legs would not work, and I lay moaning with a throbbing head, and Ragnar roared with laughter and made me drink more mead until I threw up. Ragnar, of course, won the drinking competition, and Raven recited a long poem about some ancient hero who killed a monster, and then the monster's mother, who was even more fearsome than her son. But I was too drunk to remember much of it. And after the Yule Feast, I discovered something new about the Danes and their gods. For Ragnar had ordered a great pit dug in the woods above his house, and Rorik and I helped make the pit in a clearing. We axed through tree roots, shovelled out earth, and still Ragnar wanted it deeper, and he was only satisfied when he could stand in the base of the pit and not see across its lip. A ramp led down into the hole, beside which was a great heap of excavated soil. The next night all Ragnar's men, but no women, walked to the pit in the darkness. We boys carried pitch-soaked torches that flamed under the trees, casting flickering shadows that melted into the surrounding darkness. The men were all dressed and armed as though they were going to war. Blind Raven waited at the pit, standing at the far side from the ramp, and he chanted a great epic in praise of Odin. On and on it went, the words as hard and rhythmic as a drum beat, describing how the great god had made the world from the corpse of the giant Ymir, and how he had hurled the sun and moon into the sky, and how his spear Gungnir was the mightiest weapon in creation, forged by dwarves in the world's deeps. And on the poem went, and the men gathered around the pit seemed to sway to the poem's pulse, sometimes repeating a phrase. And I stared out into the woods, watching the shadows, wondering what things moved in the dark, and thinking of Shedugengn. I often thought of the Shedugengn, the shadow walkers. It had been well known that there were shadow walkers who moved silent and half seen across the land, mysterious creatures who could change their shapes. One moment they were wolves, then they were men, or perhaps eagles, and they were neither alive nor dead, but things from the shadow world, night beasts. And I stared into the dark trees, and I wanted there to be Shedugengn out there in the dark, something that would be my secret. I remember my excitement that night at the notion of harnessing the power of the shadow walkers, before a whinny brought my attention back to the pit, and I saw that the men at the ramp had divided, and that a strange procession was coming from the dark. There was a stallion, a ram, a dog, a goose, a bull, and a boar, each animal led by one of Ragnar's warriors, and at the back was an English prisoner, a man condemned for moving a field marker, and he, like the beasts, had a rope about his neck. I knew the stallion. It was Ragnar's finest, a great black horse called Flamestepper, a horse Ragnar loved. Yet Flamestepper, like all the other beasts, was to be given to Odin that night. Ragnar did it. Stripped to his waist, his scarred chest broad in the flamelight, he used a war axe to kill the beasts one by one, and Flamestepper was the last animal to die, and the great horse's eyes were white as it was forced down the ramp. It struggled, terrified by the stench of blood that had splashed the sides of the pit, and Ragnar went to the horse, and there were tears on his face as he kissed Flamestepper's muzzle. And then he killed him. One blow between the eyes, straight and true, so that the stallion fell, hooves thrashing but dead within a heartbeat. The man died last, and that was not so distressing as the horse's death. And then Ragnar stood in the mess of blood-matted fur and raised his gore-smothered axe to the sky. "Odin!" he shouted. "Odin!" Every man echoed the shout, and they held their swords or spears or axes towards the steaming pit. "Odin!" they shouted again. All the corpses were taken from the pit and hung from tree branches. Their blood had been given to the creatures beneath the earth, and now their flesh was given to the gods above. And then we filled in the pit, we danced on it to stamp down the earth, and the jars of ale and skins of mead were handed around, and we drank beneath the hanging corpses. Odin, the terrible god, had been summoned because Ragnar and his people were going to war. I thought of the blades held over the pit of blood. I thought of the god stirring in his corpse hall to send a blessing on these men. I was only 10 years old, but on that night I knew what I would become. I would join the Shade Gengen. I would be a shadow walker.